Up to this point, I've been painting Romeo as the greatest of libertines, as though the only thing that he really desires is to tangerate someone else, is to touch someone else, to have sexual license with someone else, or to dominate over the world. But Shakespeare never makes one-sided characters. His characters are always very complex psychologically. And one of the things we need to note in this play is that sin or error or evil never comes from an evil place. It almost inevitably comes from a good place or a good desire or something that is actually worthwhile considering. And so in this case, we have Romeo who wishes to have that physical contact with someone else, with a girl, but his desire comes from something which is tragic, is a very profound tragic place, and we see this when we look at Act 1, Scene 1. Looking at the conversation that he first has with Benvolio, we get a sense of what Romeo actually is dealing with. His father has said earlier, Montague has said earlier, that Romeo comes home and locks himself away in his room and won't talk to his parents, and is dark and gloomy and brooding. He's not dark and gloomy and brooding, though, over not having a girl. At least not, that's the only thing he's dark and brooding over. He's really brooding over something far more profound. It's that profound thing which appears here in Act 1, Scene 1, in the exchange between Benvolio and Romeo. Benvolio asks what saddens Romeo. And Romeo's response immediately is, not having that which having makes my days short. And then Benvolio says, are you in love? And Romeo says, no, I'm out of love, well, out of her favor, where I am in love. So his initial response is that he doesn't have that thing which having would make his days shorter. Right now his days seem long and gloomy because he doesn't have that thing. And Benvolio immediately turns it to love. And Romeo says, yes, it's because Rosalind essentially is not giving me her love. But there's more to it than that. Even if Romeo doesn't recognize it, his words betray that there's something deeper than that. There has just been a brawl in the town, in the local neighborhood, and there are corpses lying all about. There's a mess, blood, the signs of the struggle. Romeo then coming up doesn't notice the struggle at first, and he's so immersed in his own faults that he doesn't notice that there's been something going on in the nature of a fight. But then he says to Benvolio, he says, alas, that love, whose view is muffled still, should without eyes see pathways to his will. Where shall we dine? And then there's what's called in poetry a caesura. A caesura is an abrupt halt in the poetry that indicates normally a change in thought of some kind in the character. So here we have a caesura where he stops suddenly. He says, where should we dine? And then he looks about him and says, what on earth went on here? He says, oh me, what fray was here? Where are all these corpses lying about? And immediately he says to Benvolio, yet tell me not, for I have heard it all. In other words, I've heard this story before. I've seen this kind of carnage before. I know why this carnage exists. I've been brooding over it for some time now. You don't need to go into detail. This seems to me to be the real reason why he's brooding so much. He goes on to talk about a series of paradoxes called oxymorons. And these oxymorons that he brings up in the next few lines indicate that his thought is only partially on the erotic, the desire for love or sexuality. He says the following:
"'Tis much to do with hate, but more with love. Why then, O brawling love, O loving hate, O anything of nothing first create, O heavy lightness, serious vanity, misshapen chaos of well-seeming forms, feather of lead, bright smoke, cold fire, sick health, still waking sleep. That is not what it is.
Well, what that means is that if he is seeing the world as brawling love and loving hate and of serious vanity and feather of lead and bright smoke, what he's brooding on is the paradoxical nature of existence. The fact that we live in this very violent world and a world of pain and suffering and sorrow. Why do we live in such a world? Why is our world so filled with misery and distress and sorrow and eventually death? And if it is filled with that, why is it that at the same time we have these longings for something beautiful and bright, noble, beyond this world? Why, if the world is evil, do we long for good or even have an inkling of good? And why, if there is good, is the world so evil? It's sort of the same question that's brought up by Boethius earlier in history.
If there is a God, why is there evil? And if there is no God, how can there be good?
And to this, then Romeo says, "Do you laugh at me? Dost thou laugh, cuz?" And Benvolio says, "No, rather, I weep. I weep at what you're saying, because I feel the same thing. I weep at your good heart's oppression." And I think that this is really the heart of the tragedy of the play. Romeo is a young man, probably 16 or 17 years old, and he is just awakened within the year or two, perhaps, to the fact that the world is a cruel place. The world is a dark, cruel, mean, oppressive, almost sadistic place. What kind of deity would create a place like that? What kind of God would create a world where humans suffer and kill each other and inevitably uh, uh, endure a world of such intense pain? Is that a good God or is that a sadistic God? And if, for instance, the world is nothing but pain, then how is it we have an inkling of a good God at all? Are we just deluding ourselves? It's really, to some degree, it's the question of the human race that Romeo is brooding on. He's just waking up to this question. Dealing with this question makes adults. If you wrestle with this question and deal with this question, you begin to take on a much greater seriousness, a seriousness of real adulthood. Children, for instance, think the world is bright and beautiful and everybody loves them. They think that their mom and dad know what they're doing, everything's in its place. That basically what the world is a beautiful, good place. And they don't consider the fact that there's actually evil out there in the world. At some point in life, we all have to reckon with the idea that the world is a cruel place. We wake up to the idea that parents don't know what they're doing, that people die, that people suffer, that people cause cruelty to one another, that natural disasters occur and cause great suffering, that disease occurs, that death occurs to everyone eventually. And these dark and brooding thoughts weigh on us very heavily. It means being kicked out from the Garden of Eden. The book of Genesis talks about this. The Garden of Eden is really a place where everything's perfect and God is in his place and man knows what he's doing. And at some point, awakening to the knowledge of good and evil, taking that fruit into us, causes us to be banished from that world of childhood. We can never be children again in the same way. And that's sort of what's happening to Romeo. And yet at the same time, he longs for something beautiful. He longs for something sensuous, some world where everything's perfect and everybody loves him and everything that happens to him is good. Well, that's the world of, in some ways, of fantasy, the world of sexuality, the world of fantastical existence. It doesn't actually exist. Romeo wants it to exist, but it doesn't exist. And his longing for it to exist prevents him from really accepting the world as it is. He's not a realist yet. He's still a romantic. And he wants to bend the world to his desire for this good thing. So I go back to that theme again, that lust in Romeo. is not lust as we think it now. It's not just simply sexuality. Sexuality is in some ways the tip of the iceberg. It's like that's the response of somebody who's longing for this world of beauty and happiness, unalloyed with any kind of sorrow or misery. Real love accepts the misery, the weakness, the failing of the world, and still loves and enjoys being alive. Lust wants to eradicate all the suffering and horror and misery of the world in order to have this peaceful, warm cocoon of sensuality around you where everything's perfect. And thus humans become these sort of contradictory creatures. Romeo brings this up later on in the lines, and he says,
Love is a smoke raised with the fume of sighs, being purged, a fire sparkling in lovers' eyes, being vexed, a sea nourished with lovers' tears. What is it else? A madness, most discreet, a choking gall, and a preserving sweet.
and here perhaps Shakespeare's right. Perhaps love is a smoke raised with a fume of sighs. Maybe love is itself desiring something which is paradoxical. It is fire sparkling in the lover's eyes. It is a sea nourished with lover's tears, and we're abandoned on that sea. It's a type of madness to desire dreams, to desire things that are more beautiful than this world. In some ways, maybe that is a type of madness, and it ends up choking us to a certain degree. And then finally, Romeo says, I have lost myself. I am not here. This is not Romeo. He's some other where. That experience of love that Romeo seems to be enduring right now is one which causes him to lose himself. He does not know himself. He does not know who he is anymore. His childish vision of himself is completely gone. And that's dangerous. He's in a very dangerous spot, not just to himself, but to others. Because right now he's looking for an answer in another person. Rosalind, Juliet. He's hoping that that sensuality with those women will be the resolution to his sorrow and his suffering. But what Shakespeare seems to be indicating here is that this is not a resolution. The misery, the sorrow, the suffering that we endure as human beings is not immediately solved simply by losing ourselves in the arms of another.